This first video is going to cover some basic angle rules to hopefully let us beat all of the levels in stage 1 for a tangled web. So some of the questions that we're going to answer in this video are, what are angles and how do we name angles? However, we're also going to get a little bit more specific with what we call opposite angles or vertical angles, but as well as complementary and supplementary angles as well. So I always do wonder, why are obtuse angles always so sad? It's because they're never right. I think that one's a great one. So we're going to start with naming angles to make sure people know what we're talking about. And one of the things that's kind of tough with naming angles is there's so many different ways to do it. For example, if we're looking at this angle here, which we're going to mark with a right angle symbol, which means that it is equal to 90 degrees, we could call this angle B. Now, we could use this symbol for angle, which looks a lot like the less than symbol, but it is the angle symbol here. So if we look at angle B, that means we're looking at this 90-degree angle. However, there are lots of times when we have multiple angles that both use the point B. So we could call it 3 letters that create the vertex of B. So I could call this angle ABC, with the center point being that vertex, that center point that actually determines the measure of the angle. But I could go the opposite direction as well. I could go C to B to A, and I could call it CBA as well. So there are 3 different ways to describe this angle. And as long as that center point is the vertex of the angle, then it doesn't matter if we do it as ABC or CBA. If it's an angle like this, where there is only one angle being created at point B, then you could also just call it regular angle B. Now, if I have this one, this is why if we call it angle M, it can be really confusing, because do I mean the angle from here to here? Or do I mean the angle from here to here? Or do I mean the angle all the way across? So angle M is actually not that good here as we get into harder angles. However, if I'm looking for this angle here, I could do LMN, or I could do angle NML from here to here to here, or the opposite direction. Now, I also can do the angle over here, which would be angle NMO. Once again, remembering the center point has to be the vertex. Or I could do OMN. And there is one more big angle I can do over the top, which would be LMO, all the way from here to our vertex, all the way down. But I also could do OML because the direction doesn't matter for these. Now, when I'm working with straight angles, which is kind of the first big skill you see in a tangled web, we need to remember some vocabulary that hopefully you've seen a little bit before at this point in your life. Supplementary angles are angles that add to 180 degrees. So if I have an angle of 60 and an angle of 120, they would add up to be supplementary. However, complementary are angles that add to 90 degrees. And I have to remember that I can do more than 2 angles to be supplementary or complementary. So for this one, I could do 30 plus 30 plus 30 would also be complementary. So the first big thing in our game is going to talk about what we call straight angles, which are supplementary angles. Because if I have a line here, I know that a flat line adds to a total of 180 degrees. The way that I remember is if I stand facing forward and I jump up and do 1/2 turn and I face the opposite direction, people call that a 180. Like a half turn is automatically a 180. If I do a full turn, that would be called a 360 for one full circle. So in order to solve this problem for x, I'm going to do 180 minus 50 is equal to x. Or I could do 180 minus x is equal to 50. But either way, I would see that my x is equal to 130 degrees, because 130 plus 50 is equal to 180, which makes it supplementary. Let's go to the next page here, which I believe is this one. There we go. So we have two angles that create a straight angle, which creates a straight line. But a straight angle also means that these two angles are supplementary, or that they add to 180 degrees. So once again, I know that x plus 95 has to equal 180. So I can subtract 180 minus 95 to get my answer. Now you're going to notice through all of the videos that I do, I'm going to try to solve these problems a slightly different way every time, because my goal here is to show you that there are tons and tons of different ways to solve these problems without there being a perfect or best way. For this problem, 85 degrees plus 95 degrees adds to 180, making it supplementary and a straight angle. Now this one down here I really like, because there are so many different ways to solve this problem that I could look at these two angles here and realize that they add to 180 degrees. I could look at these two angles here and realize they add to 100 degrees. But I also could look at all four angles and remember that they have to add to 360 degrees, which is what I'm going to do for this problem. So if I do 40 plus 40 plus 140, and I add all of those together, I get 220 degrees. From there, I can do 360 minus 220 should be equal to my x. And from there, I should get 140 degrees. I also notice that this measure is the same as the angle directly across from it, which leads perfectly into the last angle that we're going to work with on this video, which we call vertical angles. Okay, vertical angles are also called opposite angles because they work with what we call these big intersections. So where I have an x intersects in opposite directions. And if I take this line here and I rotate it, if you notice, the angle on the top and bottom change in the same way. And if I rotate it this way, the angles on the left and the right change in the same way as well, which means that when you have vertical angles or opposite angles are always equal. So if I have an intersection like this, the angles on this side have to be equal to each other. And then the angles on this side have to be equal to each other. And therefore, in this problem, x has to equal 100 degrees and your y has to equal 80 degrees. Because they are vertical angles from each other, I can double check that by remembering that we have two supplementary angles here to here and supplementary angles here to here. And we know that 100 plus 80 equals 180. So we are right on two different methods. If I go back to the problem before, x and 140 are vertical angles. Therefore, my x could have been 140 immediately using that same strategy. So for our last problem, I want you to try to solve for x in a few different ways and see if you can get that answer correct. So I found two different ways to answer this question. The first one is I know that these two angles have to be supplementary because they are a straight angle. They create a line here. So if I did 180, whoops, that was a horrible 8, minus 120, I get 60 degrees. So my x would be equal to 60 degrees here. The other way that I could have gotten it is by looking here and going directly across. And I know that because they are vertical angles, x should be the same as 60 degrees, and that would give us our answer. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know.